Eleanor lived in a small, cozy house with a garden full of roses. At 62, her hair was a soft silver, often pulled back in a neat bun. Her steps were gentle, and her voice, when she spoke, was calm and kind. To most people who knew her, especially her loving family, Eleanor was a picture of quiet grace. They saw her as a dear, sweet lady who enjoyed her books, her knitting, and baking delicious apple pies. Her daughter Sarah would often visit, bringing fresh groceries and fussing over Eleanor. "Now, Mom, don't you lift anything too heavy?" she'd say, gently taking a bag of apples from Eleanor's hands. Her grandson Leo loved to visit too, but he often helped with chores, thinking his grandmother needed the extra hand. He meant well, of course, but it was clear he thought of her as someone who needed looking after, not someone who could still do much on her own. Even at church gatherings or town meetings, Eleanor found herself quietly steered away from tasks that seemed too strenuous. Mrs. Henderson, a well-meaning neighbor, once suggested, "Eleanor, dear, why don't you just sit and supervise? The young folks can handle the heavy decorations for the bake sale." Eleanor would simply smile and nod, a tiny part of her feeling a little sad, but she never argued. She didn't want to cause a fuss. Her days were filled with comfortable routines. A cup of tea in the morning, a walk around her garden, a good book in the afternoon. It was a peaceful life, yes, but sometimes, when the house was quiet and the sun dipped low, a flicker of something else would stir inside her. A memory, perhaps, of a time when she was seen differently, when her strength wasn't just in her gentle smile but in her hands and her spirit. But those thoughts were quickly tucked away, like old photographs in a dusty album. Everyone thought they knew Eleanor. They thought she was gentle, a little fragile, and, perhaps, just a bit past her prime. The quiet longing that sometimes flickered within Eleanor wasn't just about feeling strong, it was also about being heard. One sunny afternoon, while Sarah was helping Eleanor tidy the garden, Eleanor suggested, "Perhaps we could move the rose bush by the gate? It might get more sun there." Sarah paused, trowel in hand. "Oh, Mom, that's a big job. You know, that rose has been there for years. Let's just leave it. You don't want to overdo it." Eleanor simply nodded, though she knew the bush would thrive better elsewhere. Her idea, a simple observation, was gently brushed aside. Another time, the town council was discussing plans for a new community center. Eleanor had attended many meetings, listening intently. She had a wonderful idea about adding a small, sunny reading nook for children, knowing how much joy a quiet corner could bring. When the floor opened for suggestions, she raised her hand, a little hesitantly. Before she could fully voice her thought, the mayor, a kind but busy man, smiled warmly and said, "Eleanor, thank you for being here. We know you always support our town. Let's hear from Mr. Davies next, who has some building expertise." Her voice, soft as it was simply unheard, lost in the rush of louder, more important voices. Even her grandson, Leo, with all his good intentions, often treated her like a delicate antique. One brisk autumn morning, Eleanor felt a burst of energy and decided to sweep the fallen leaves from her porch. She was halfway done, enjoying the rhythmic swish of the broom, when Leo arrived. "Grandma, what are you doing? You should be sitting inside with a warm drink," he exclaimed, taking the broom from her hand. "Here, let me do that. You just relax." Eleanor wanted to say, "But I like sweeping, Leo. It feels good to be active." Instead, she just offered a small smile and watched him finish the task she had started. It wasn't that she minded the help. It was the unspoken message that she wasn't capable, that she should always take it easy, that pricked at her heart. These small moments, like tiny pebbles in her shoe, slowly added up. The feeling of being overlooked was a familiar tune, a quiet hum in Eleanor's everyday life. Yet, in the dusty corners of her mind, a different melody sometimes played. It was a tune of vibrant colors and swift, sure strokes. Years ago, before marriage and children, before the gentle silver of her hair, Eleanor had been an artist. Not a famous one, but a passionate one. She painted landscapes, mostly, capturing the way light fell on fields and trees, with a skill that surprised many. Her favorite medium was watercolor, challenging, quick quick and unforgiving, much like life itself. She had studied art in college, dreaming of a studio filled with canvases. But life, as it often does, took a different path. Her husband's work moved them, children arrived, and her paints and brushes were carefully packed away, first in a spare room, then the attic, then simply forgotten in the busy rhythm of family life. Occasionally, she'd see an art show advertised or flip through a book of paintings, and that familiar spark would glow. But it always faded, pushed down by the practicalities of raising a family and the unspoken expectation that her hobby was something of the past. There was a small wooden box, tucked away in the back of her closet, filled with tubes of dried paint, a few worn brushes, and a stack of yellowed paper. It smelled faintly of pigment and old dreams. Sometimes, when she was alone, Eleanor would open it, tracing the lines of a dried-up brush with her finger. She remembered the joy of mixing colors, the quiet focus as a scene came alive on paper, the feeling of her hand moving with purpose and precision. It wasn't just about making pretty pictures. It was about seeing the world deeply, about expressing something that words couldn't quite capture. This hidden passion, a part of her that had been dormant for decades, still held a quiet power. It was the Eleanor no one knew, the one who saw more than just roses in her garden. The wooden box, with its scent of old dreams and dried paints, lay untouched for weeks after Eleanor last opened it. Then came the day of the annual town fair. Eleanor always looked forward to it, especially the art exhibit, even though she rarely submitted anything herself. This year, her granddaughter Lily, a bright and eager 10-year-old, had entered a finger painting. Eleanor walked through the hall, admiring the colorful displays. She stopped at Lily's painting, a joyful swirl of primary colors. Lily, standing proudly beside it, beamed. Just then, Mrs. Gable, the head of the art committee, walked by. She paused at Lily's work, smiling. "Oh, what a charming piece, Lily, so full of youthful spirit. It reminds me of the simple beauty in art, something we sometimes lose as we get older, don't we, Eleanor?" she said, turning to Eleanor with a kindly, but almost pitying glance. "It's lovely to see the children expressing themselves so freely." The words weren't meant to be hurtful, but they landed on Eleanor like a featherlight stone, something we sometimes lose as we get older. Asterisk. It wasn't just about Lily's painting. It was the unspoken assumption that Eleanor, by virtue of her age, had lost her own capacity for that youthful spirit and expression. She felt a familiar prickle of being dismissed, but this time, it mixed with a new, quiet resolve. Later that evening, as she sat in her armchair, the image of Mrs. Gable's kind, but patronizing smile kept returning. Then, her eyes fell on an advertisement in the local paper for an upcoming amateur art showcase at the community center. It was open to everyone, regardless of age or experience. A small notice at the bottom mentioned a special section for local landscapes. It wasn't a grand art gallery, just a humble community event. But as Eleanor read it, a thought bloomed in her mind, clear and strong. Why not? It wasn't about proving Mrs. Gable wrong or anyone else. It was about proving something to herself. The old wooden box in her closet suddenly felt less like a relic of the past and more like a promise for the future. The decision to revisit her paints was a quiet one, made deep within Eleanor's heart. The next morning, instead of her usual gardening, she went straight to her closet. With a soft click, the wooden box was opened. The dried paints, stiff brushes, and yellowed paper stared back at her, a silent challenge. She carefully pulled out the materials, deciding to buy fresh supplies first. She didn't want to draw attention, so her trip to the small art supply shop in the next town was a secret mission. She bought a new set of watercolors, a block of fresh paper, and a few good brushes, paying with cash and tucking the bag deep into her larger shopping tote. Her studio became the small sunroom at the back of her house, a space usually reserved for reading. She would wait until Sarah had left after her visits, or until Leo had finished his chores and gone home. Then, with the door closed and the blinds drawn just enough to let in soft light, Eleanor would begin. At first, it was clumsy. Her hands, used to knitting needles and garden trowels, felt stiff holding a delicate brush. The colors bled where they shouldn't, the lines were shaky, and the shapes looked nothing like the vibrant landscapes she remembered creating. Frustration, a feeling she rarely allowed herself, bubbled up. But Eleanor was nothing if not persistent. She started with simple exercises: washes of color, straight lines, circles. She bought a small, inexpensive book on watercolor techniques for beginners, reading it under the covers at night like a secret novel. Slowly, very slowly, the stiffness in her hands began to ease. Her eyes, once quick to blur over fine details, refocused. She dedicated an hour each day, sometimes more, to her practice, often listening to classical music softly playing. She kept her progress hidden, tucking away her half-finished paintings in a drawer, always making sure her sunroom looked exactly as it did before her secret sessions. No one suspected that Eleanor, the gentle lady who loved her roses, was quietly rekindling a fire within. Eleanor's quiet determination faced its first real tests beyond just stiff hands. Hours spent hunched over her paper in the sunroom started to take a toll. Her back would ache, and her eyes, even with her reading glasses, sometimes struggled with the tiny details. She found herself needing to stand up more often, stretching her shoulders, feeling the familiar creaks of her 62-year-old body. It was a physical challenge she hadn't anticipated, a gentle reminder that time had passed since her college days. Then there were the internal struggles. Sometimes after a particularly messy painting or a line that refused to go where she wanted, a little voice in her head would whisper, "What are you doing, Eleanor? You're too old for this. Your best years are behind you." These old doubts, like stubborn weeds, tried to creep into her mind, threatening to choke her newfound joy. She'd look at her shaky attempts, comparing them to the vivid images in her memory, and a wave of discouragement would wash over her. But Eleanor met these challenges with the same quiet strength she applied to her garden. For her aching back, she started doing gentle stretches each morning, movements she remembered from a forgotten yoga class decades ago. She also adjusted her painting setup, finding a cushion for her chair and making sure her light was always just right. To combat the doubts, she would talk to herself, kindly but firmly. "It's okay to make mistakes," she'd murmur. "Every artist starts somewhere, even again." She focused on the small victories: a color blend that worked just right, a leaf that looked almost real, the pure enjoyment of the process itself. She didn't expect perfection, only progress. And with each small step forward, the doubts grew a little quieter, and her resolve grew a little stronger. As weeks turned into a couple of months, Eleanor's daily dedication began to bear fruit, quietly and subtly. The gentle stretches she started for her back slowly made her feel more limber, not just when painting, but throughout her day. She noticed she could reach for a high shelf without a wince, or carry a bag of groceries from the car with less effort. Her hands, once stiff and hesitant, now moved with a surer touch, the brush becoming an extension of her will rather than a foreign object. Beyond the physical, her mind felt sharper too. The intense focus required by watercolors, the careful mixing of colors, the planning of light and shadow, was like a daily workout for her brain. She found herself remembering small details from conversations more easily, and solving little household puzzles with a quicker wit. The world around her seemed to open up, colors in her garden appearing more vivid, the play of light on her kitchen counter becoming a fascinating study. She started seeing potential paintings everywhere. Most importantly, a quiet confidence began to bloom within her, like a hidden flower. It wasn't a loud, boastful feeling, but a deep, steady knowing. When a painting didn't turn out right, the old doubts still whispered, but they were weaker now. She knew she could try again, learn from the mistake, and improve. This newfound belief in her own ability wasn't just confined to her art. She found herself speaking a little more clearly, making eye contact a little more firmly, even when discussing mundane things with Sarah or Leo. They didn't notice the reason for the change, of course. To them, Eleanor was still Eleanor, but inside, a quiet revolution was taking place. She was reconnecting with a part of herself she thought was long gone, and it felt wonderful. The amateur art showcase flyer, still tacked to her fridge, served as a gentle reminder of her goal. The deadline was approaching, and Eleanor knew it was time for a small step, a quiet push out of her secret world. She had several paintings she felt proud of now, mostly landscapes of her own garden and the nearby woods, rendered in soft, flowing watercolors. They were far from perfect, but they hummed with the quiet joy of their creation. She decided on a painting of her rose garden at dawn, the petals still dewy, the light just beginning to kiss the leaves. It was one of her favorites, capturing the delicate beauty she saw every morning. But instead of simply submitting it, Eleanor had a different idea. The showcase allowed for anonymous submissions. All she had to do was fill out a form with a number, not her name. One Tuesday morning, when Sarah was at work and Leo was at school, Eleanor carefully wrapped the painting in brown paper. She drove to the community center, her heart beating a little faster than usual. Inside, the main hall was still, a few volunteers setting up tables. Mrs. Gable was there, clipboard in hand, bustling about. Eleanor avoided her gaze, feeling a familiar shyness. She walked to the submission desk, where a young woman with a friendly smile greeted her. "Here for the showcase?" the woman asked. "Yes, please," Eleanor replied, her voice a little softer than she intended. "I'd like to submit this one, anonymously." The young woman nodded, handing her a form and a small sticker with the number 07. Eleanor filled it out quickly, her hands steady. She placed the sticker on the back of her painting. As she left, she glanced back at the hall. Her painting, wrapped in its simple brown paper, was just one among many, waiting to be hung. No one knew it was hers. No one knew the hours of quiet effort, the rediscovered joy, the battles fought and won in her little sunroom. It was a subtle step, barely a ripple in the pond of her quiet life, but for Eleanor it felt like a leap. The day of the amateur art showcase arrived, and Eleanor, with a flutter of nerves and excitement, decided to attend. She mingled quietly, pretending to just be an observer, but her eyes kept searching for painting number 07. When she found it, nestled between a vibrant abstract and a charming still life, her heart gave a little leap. It looked even better on the wall, the soft dawn light on the roses seeming to glow. She overheard snippets of conversation. "Oh, this one's lovely, so peaceful," a woman murmured to her friend, pointing to Eleanor's piece. "Who do you think painted it?" Her friend shrugged. "Probably one of the new art club members. They're quite good." This made Eleanor smile inwardly. No one suspected it was the quiet Eleanor. Later, she saw Mrs. Gable standing near her painting, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Number 07, Mrs. Rabogs-Hillid." Gable mused aloud to a passing volunteer. "There's a real delicacy to the light, isn't there? And the way the colors blend." Very professional for an amateur. Eleanor felt a warm blush spread across her cheeks, pleased by the compliment, especially from someone who had once subtly dismissed her artistic potential. Not all reactions were so keen, however. She heard a younger man scoff at a different landscape nearby. "Too traditional for my taste. Where's the edge?" And a woman comment on another. "Looks like my kid could do that." Eleanor realized that art, like everything else, was a matter of taste. Her painting wasn't for everyone, and that was perfectly fine. But then, a moment stood out. A young woman, perhaps in her 20s, stood before painting 07 for a long time. She then turned to her friend and said, "Look at this, Sarah. The person who painted this really saw those roses. You can feel the quietness of the morning. It's truly beautiful." Eleanor felt a surge of quiet triumph. Someone had truly seen her work. And through it, perhaps a glimpse of the Eleanor she was becoming. It was a small beginning, but it was enough. The quiet triumph Eleanor felt at the art showcase was a gentle nudge, encouraging her forward. A few days later, a small notice appeared in the local paper, announcing the winners of the amateur art showcase. Eleanor, with a cup of tea in hand, scanned the list. Her eyes widened as she read, "Honorable mention, entry number 07, Dawn Roses." A warm flush spread through her. An honorable mention. It wasn't first place, but it was public recognition, a small success for her secret efforts. She cut out the small article and tucked it into her painting book, a private treasure. The next week, Sarah came over for their usual Tuesday visit. She was bubbling with news. "Mom, you won't believe it. Mrs. Henderson from the church was just telling me about the art showcase. She said the Dawn Roses painting, number 07, got an honorable mention. She couldn't stop talking about how beautiful it was. Everyone's wondering who painted it. Eleanor simply smiled, stirring her tea. Oh, really? That's lovely. She enjoyed the secret knowledge, letting Sarah chatter on, unaware that the artist was sitting right across from her. A few days later, a call came from the community center. It was the young woman from the submission desk. Hello, is this Eleanor Vance? This is Maria from the community center. I'm calling about your painting, Dawn Roses. We've had a lot of positive feedback, and Mrs. Gable, the head of the committee, was especially impressed. She was wondering if you'd be willing to let us feature it on the cover of our next quarterly newsletter. We'd, of course, credit you by name, if you're comfortable with that. Eleanor's heart thumped. Featured on the newsletter? Credited by name? This was a much bigger step than she had imagined. A deep breath, then a soft, clear voice. Yes, Maria. I would be very comfortable with that. Her efforts, once hidden, were about to gain a little more visibility, stepping out of the shadows and into the quiet light of her community. When the community center newsletter arrived in mailboxes, Eleanor's Dawn Roses painting graced the cover, her name, Eleanor Vance, printed clearly beneath it. The quiet ripples she had made were now turning into noticeable waves. Sarah was the first to call, her voice full of astonished pride. Mom, your painting, on the asterisk cover. I had no idea you painted, let alone so beautifully. Why didn't you tell us? Eleanor chuckled softly. It was my little secret, dear. Sarah's tone was no longer one of gentle concern, but of genuine awe. Then came Leo, her grandson, who showed up at her door clutching the newsletter. Grandma, this is amazing. You did this? I thought you just, knit and gardened. He looked at her with new eyes, seeing not just his sweet grandma, but an artist. Can you teach me? Like, how do you make the light look like that? Even Mrs. Gable, who had offered the patronizing comment at the fair, approached Eleanor at the grocery store. Eleanor, my dear, I had no idea that exquisite painting was yours. It's simply wonderful. To think, all these years, this talent was hidden. You're an inspiration. Her words were now filled with respect, not pity. People in town, who once offered gentle advice to take it easy, now complimented her on her artistic skill. Mr. Henderson from next door, usually focused on his prize-winning tomatoes, stopped her to say, Eleanor, that cover is beautiful. You really captured the spirit of our town. It wasn't just her painting they were impressed by. It was the quiet revelation of her hidden talent, her persistence in rekindling a long-lost skill. They saw a different side of Eleanor, a powerful, creative spirit they had completely overlooked. The shift in how they saw her was palpable, a refreshing change from the well-meaning but limiting perceptions they once held. The public recognition, though initially surprising, didn't change Eleanor into someone loud or boastful. Her comeback wasn't about grand gestures or seeking fame. It was about the steady, quiet strength she had rediscovered. She continued her daily painting sessions in the sunroom, still finding joy in the solitary act of creation. The only difference was that now, her door was sometimes left ajar. Leo, her grandson, would often peek in. Grandma, can I watch? He'd ask, his eyes wide with curiosity. Eleanor would smile and nod, explaining how she mixed colors, or created the illusion of depth. He sometimes sat beside her, sketching in a notebook, inspired by her quiet focus. Sarah, too, would occasionally bring her knitting and sit in the sunroom, enjoying the peaceful atmosphere as Eleanor painted. The take-it-easy comments had stopped, replaced by genuine interest and quiet admiration. Eleanor also started attending a local watercolor club, a small group that met once a week. She didn't lead discussions or seek the spotlight, but she shared her techniques and learned from others. Her contributions were always thoughtful, her observations keen. When the town library decided to update its children's section, Mrs. Gable, now a firm admirer, approached Eleanor. Eleanor, would you consider painting a small mural for the reading nook? Something with local scenes. Your Dawn Roses would be perfect. Eleanor, after a moment of thoughtful consideration, agreed. It was a new challenge, a larger scale than her usual paper, but she approached it with the same calm determination. Her comeback was not a fleeting moment of glory, but a continuous, gentle unfolding. She was growing, not just as an artist, but as a woman who knew her own worth, contributing her unique gifts to her community with quiet, powerful consistency. The mural in the children's reading nook was a gentle masterpiece, a flowing landscape of local hills and the river, painted with Eleanor's signature soft light. At its unveiling, her family gathered, their faces beaming. Sarah, her daughter, hugged Eleanor tightly. "Mom, I'm just so incredibly proud of you," she whispered, a catch in her voice. "I feel like I've known you my whole life, but there was this whole amazing part one never saw. I'm so sorry we always treated you like you needed to be so careful." Eleanor just squeezed her hand, understanding shining in her eyes. Leo, standing a little taller, proudly pointed out details in the mural to his friends. "My grandma painted that," he declared, his chest puffed out. He often brought his own sketchbook now, not just to watch Eleanor, but to share his own drawings, seeking her gentle guidance. He no longer rushed to take the broom from her hand. Instead, he might ask, "Grandma, do you need any help with the garden today, or are you feeling up to it?" The difference was subtle, but profound. A question of capability, not an assumption of fragility. Even Mrs. Henderson, her kind but once patronizing neighbor, brought Eleanor a bouquet of fresh-cut flowers. "Eleanor, you are truly remarkable," she said, her eyes shining. "To pick up something so beautiful after all these years. It just goes to show you never really know what quiet strength a person holds inside." Eleanor's friends from the watercolor club, and even casual acquaintances from church, expressed their admiration. They spoke not just of her beautiful paintings, but of her dedication, her quiet perseverance. They saw the sparkle in her eyes, the confident way she held her brush, the newfound spring in her step. They had all, in their own well-meaning ways, underestimated the depths of Eleanor's spirit, seeing only the gentle surface. Now they saw the vibrant, resilient woman underneath, and their pride was clear for all to see. Eleanor's quiet journey from hidden artist to celebrated muralist didn't just change how her family and friends saw her, it began to inspire others in the community. After the library mural was finished, Eleanor found herself approached by people she barely knew, their eyes full of newfound hope. "Eleanor, I saw your painting." Mrs. Rodriguez, a woman a few years older than Eleanor, confided one day at the market. "It's just beautiful. And, I always loved to sing when I was younger, but I stopped. Seeing you, well, it makes me think maybe it's not too late to join the church choir." Another time, a man named Arthur, who used to be a carpenter, shared his story. He'd retired years ago, feeling his useful days were behind him. "My hands aren't what they used to be," he told Eleanor. "But watching you with your brushes, it makes me wonder if I could try something smaller, like carving little birds." Eleanor never sought to be a public speaker or a grand example. She simply shared her story, softly, whenever asked. She'd talk about the joy of rediscovering her passion, the patience it took, and the wonderful feeling of creating again. Her simple message was powerful. Age isn't a wall, it's just another path. Her quiet strength showed everyone that dreams don't have an expiration date. She proved that you can pick up a forgotten skill, start something new, or simply reignite an old spark, no matter how many years have passed. She became a living testament that the human spirit, with quiet determination, can bloom at any age. She truly showed that age is just a number when it comes to pursuing passions. Eleanor sat in her sunroom, a fresh sheet of paper before her, the familiar scent of watercolor paints filling the air. Sunlight streamed through the window, warming her hands as she carefully mixed a shade of spring green. Her life hadn't been dramatically upended. She still loved her garden, her quiet books, and her family visits. But everything felt richer, deeper. She was still Eleanor, the gentle lady, but now with an undeniable glow of purpose and quiet satisfaction. The compliments and admiration from her community were pleasant, and the inspiration she offered to others was a quiet joy. Yet, the greatest change wasn't in how others saw her, but in how she saw herself. The tiny pebbles of dismissal that once pricked her heart no longer bothered her. The whispers of doubt were gone, replaced by the steady hum of her own creative spirit. She had proven herself, not to Mrs. White, Gable, or Sarah, or Leo, but to the Eleanor who had packed away her paints decades ago. She had found her way back to that vibrant, expressive part of herself, and it had made her whole. Her strength wasn't just in her hands that now painted delicate petals, but in the quiet courage to begin again. Her power wasn't in loud pronouncements, but in the consistent, loving act of creating, day after day. Eleanor was settled, content, and deeply at peace with her newfound, quiet power. Her roses still bloomed in the garden, but now, so too did the artist within her. She was a testament to the beautiful truth that a quiet comeback can be the most powerful of all.